I'm Bia, and welcome back to Cardiac Radio for Teens. For those of you who might not know, Cardiac Radio for Teens is a place where teens can come together with other teens to learn about spiritist teachings and topics in a way that can relate to us more and make sense to us more in today's society, as teenagers in today's society specifically. Together we have been going through reading the Spirits book together, question by question, word by word, and trying to really understand what is trying to be said here. So we were on the question 371. That's where we left off last week. And we're in the chapter talking about returning to corporeal life. So we talked a lot in the beginning about disincarnating, about going from the corporeal world and life, so like going from Earth to going to the spiritual world. So now we're talking about the opposite, in a way that makes sense for us. Of course, we know there's different worlds that we go to besides Earth, but just as something that's relatable to us, now we're talking about going from the spirit world back to Earth. So the large chapter that we're talking about is all about this, and now the smaller section that we're going to start today is titled Mental Impairments, Insanity. So we're going to be delving into more of that topic. So question 371. Is there any basis for the opinion that mentally impaired individuals have a soul of a little evolved nature? So they're saying here, what do you think about the opinion about when people say that people with mental disabilities, that they are less evolved? They're saying, what do you think about this? Is this true? Is this wrong? They're asking our opinion on this. And the spirits say, no, they have a human soul which is frequently more intelligent than you might think, and who suffers immensely from the insufficient of its means to communicate, as a mute suffers from the inability to speak. So the spirits are saying, no, this isn't true. We don't agree with this. That the human soul, it's more intelligent than you think, just because it might not be shown on the surface, just because they don't know how to express themselves, doesn't mean that they aren't smart inside, that their spirit has a lot to say maybe, and a lot to hear, and a lot to discover and to explore, but they're stuck with this mental disability, and they have to learn from that. But just because they have a mental disability right now, and a mental impairment now, it doesn't mean that in a previous life that they also had that. They could have been a genius. They could have been discovering things and learning things and doing so much in the previous life, but now this life they had to come like this to learn for something. Like we know that we all have to come to face our own trials to learn and move on. So this might just be a bump they're going over. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're less evolved and like this is the beginning of their life per se. Question 372. What is the aim of providence in creating unfortunate beings like the mentally impaired? So they're saying, so what's the goal? Why would we create these beings that are mentally impaired? Why would God do this? What's the purpose of it? And the spirit said, the spirits who dwell in such bodies are expiating past wrongs. They suffer from their constraints and from the impossibility of expressing themselves because of the undeveloped or defective brains. So, like they said, like we mentioned before, these spirits, they're coming to expiate, to make up for their mistakes that they did. So in a previous life, they made some sort of mistake that somehow this obstacle in their life is gonna help them to overcome that and to learn from that and fix what they've done wrong so that they can keep evolving. Then there's a second part to this question, and it says, then is it inaccurate to say that organs do not exercise any influence on the faculties? And the spirit said, we have never said that organs have no influence at all. Rather, they exercise a great influence on the manifestation of the faculties. But they themselves do not produce the faculties. That is the difference. A good musician will not make good music with a bad instrument, but it does not mean he or she is not a good musician. So what they're trying to say here is that it doesn't mean that just because their organ, let's say the brain, just because their brain isn't great, isn't fully functioning, doesn't mean that the spirit doesn't have that within them. It's just the brain that's not functioning, that's not allowing the spirit to show all these faculties that it has. And then Allan Kardec puts his own comment in, and he says, "It is necessary to distinguish between the normal state and the pathological state. In the normal state, mental ability may overcome material obstacles. However, there are cases where matter offers so much resistance that the manifestations are hindered or distorted, as is the case with mental impairment and insanity. There are pathological cases, and in such state the soul is not in possession of its full reasonable ability, which is why human law exempts such persons from responsibilities for their actions." So what they're saying here is that, so they're talking about the normal state, which is saying how you can have some mental ability and you can overcome some things, but some things may be harder to do. Like, maybe you can move fine, but you can't speak. Or maybe you can speak, you have a little trouble speaking, a little trouble moving. There's certain things. So some things you can do, some things you can't. And then they said there are also pathological cases, which the soul is just not in full reasoning ability. So they can't reason with themselves. And then, which this case is, you can't really judge or give fault to whatever the person is doing because they're not really having this capacity to reason, to have any common sense. But so to sum up this question, they're basically saying that, especially talking about mental disabilities, that the brain may be distracting or preventing the soul, the spirit, from getting its thoughts out, from getting everything that it has to getting it out. The brain is kind of holding it back. It's blockading it. But just because it's blockading it doesn't mean that the spirit isn't intelligent and that the spirit doesn't have this intelligence within them. It doesn't mean they're less evolved. Question 373. What could possibly be the merit in the existence of being who, like the mentally impaired, can do neither good nor evil, and therefore cannot progress? So they're saying, so how can someone evolve if you can't do anything good or bad? So some mentally impaired people, they can barely do anything. So you're just living. You're barely doing anything. You're just getting by, just living. So you're not doing any good, but you're also not doing anything bad. So how can you progress? And the Spirit said, "It is an expiation imposed for them having abused certain faculties in a former life. It is a temporary pause." So they're saying, so this isn't a place for them to go, okay, you're going to have this test and you have to overcome it. This is a place where, this is a time where when we talk about an expiation, it's making up for the wrongdoing. So maybe when they were able to do so much, they sat down and didn't do anything. Or they were mean, or they treated people badly, or what they were doing was for evil. So now, to make up for those mistakes, they're going to come and when they want to do stuff, they're not going to be able to because they're going to have this mental disability. But when we look at the whole spiritual existence of a spirit that we know goes on forever, it's just a temporary pause. It's just a little bit, and it's just for them to learn and overcome that. So there is a purpose to it. Then there's a second part to this question, and it says, so the body of a mentally impaired person may confine a spirit who perhaps animated the body of a genius in a preceding existence? And the spirits answered, yes, genius sometimes becomes a curse when it is abused. So what they're saying here is that, yeah, sometimes people are geniuses, but they abuse that power, they abuse that intelligence, and they make it, and they abuse it, and they do something bad with it. So now they have to learn from their mistakes. Oh, you had all this intelligence, you had all this power, you could do all this stuff, and you did the wrong thing, so now you're not going to be able to do any of that stuff. And then Allan Kardec puts his own comment in, and he says, moral superiority does not always imply intellectual superiority, and the greatest geniuses may have much to expiate. Consequently, they often live in a present existence that is inferior when they compare to those who have already lived, a cause of great suffering. The impediments that these spirits experience when they try to express themselves are for them like chains that fetter the movements of an active person. One could say that the mentally impaired are disabled in the brain, as others are disabled in their limbs or eyes. So what they're saying here, what he was trying to add on to this, is that when they talk about the genius and how they're abusing powers, it's just because you're super intelligent, just because you have this superiority, you're a genius, doesn't mean that you're morally superior. Just like if we think of an extreme example, just like Adolf Hitler, he was very, very intelligent, but obviously his morals were very low, and he was not superior in morals, but he was very intelligent. So this is the kind of thing, when you have power, you have intelligence, but you abuse all of it. Question 374. In the spirit state, are the mentally impaired conscious of their mental state? And the spirit said, yes, quite often. They understand that the chains hindering their developments are a trial and an expiation. So, in the spirit state, they understand that, okay, I need to get over this, so this is why this is happening. They understand that part. Question 375. What is the situation of the spirit in the state of insanity? And the spirit said, when freed from the body, the spirit receives impressions directly, and directly exerts its action upon matter. Once incarnated, however, it finds itself in a completely different condition, and in need of acting with the help of special organs. If one part or a group of these organs is altered, the spirit's actions are interrupted. Defective eyes cause blindness. Defective ears cause deafness, etc. Now imagine that the organ presiding over the manifestation of intelligence and will is particularly or entirely damaged or modified, and you will easily understand that the use of such an incomplete or disordered organ will result in an affliction that the spirit is fully aware of, but whose course it is powerless to deter. So what they're saying here, so we're talking about the situation of a spirit in the state of insanity. And they're saying that just like how if you have a defect in your eyes, you're blind and you can't see, or if you have a defect in your ears, you can't hear. And all of these kind of things, if you have a defect in your leg, you might not walk. So all these things, so now think of it as a defect in the brain. And sometimes it's such a big defect, it's so disordered, so altered, that the spirit is fully aware of everything it has and all it can do, but it's just so powerless. It just can't do anything. It's like the brain's like completely blocking it out. So it's just like a defect in your eyes causes blindness, and defect in your leg. And now if it's a defect in your brain, if it's really big, then the spirit sees and the spirit has this intelligence and all this stuff, but it's being completely blocked. And then there's a second part to this question, and it says, then is there always the body and not the spirit that is dysfunctional? So is it always the body? Is it the physical body that you're in? The spirit is fine, but the body is not. Is it always that case? And the spirit said, yes, but you must not lose sight of the fact that just as a spirit acts upon matter, matter reacts upon the spirit to a certain degree. Hence, a spirit may find itself momentarily controlled by the alterations of its organs, through which it manifests and receives various impressions. It may happen that, with time, and after the insanity has lasted quite a while, the repetition of the same acts end up exerting on the spirit an influence from which it will not be freed until its complete separation from every material effect. So they're saying that yes, it's always the body that has this defect, that has this problem, And the spirit is intelligent, but it's being hindered. It can't show it. But it's always the body. But they're saying that this doesn't mean that the body doesn't affect the spirit. That while it's connected, the material body and the spirit, while it's connected, the spirit will be facing some of these effects. Kind of feeling like, okay, if I can't talk, they're kind of going to get like flustered and they're going to think they can't talk, or if they can't think as much and they're in this state of insanity, it is going to affect their spirit until the moment when that connection is separated. Question 376. What is the reason for insanity sometimes leading to suicide? And the spirit said, the spirit suffers immensely from its constraints and from the powerlessness to freely manifest itself. Thus, it seeks a way to break its ties in death. So like we were just saying, how even though it's the body that has the defect and the spirit doesn't, since it's connected, the spirit is facing the effects of this. It's facing the effects of the defects. So it's being like pushed and it's feeling like it can't do anything. I can't do anything. I'm powerless. And so they know that at death, that's when the connection from this body with all the defects will be. So that's why it sometimes leads to suicide. Question 377. After death, does the spirit of a mentally impaired person continue to feel the derangement of its faculties? So he's saying, so now after the spirit dies, does it still feel like it's restricted from thinking? Does it still feel like it's impaired even though it's not? And the spirit said, it may feel it for quite some time until it is completely disconnected from matter, like a person who, upon awakening, continues to feel the confusion into which sleep has immersed him or her. So they're saying that it's just like when you wake up for a dream and you're kind of confused because you kind of still feel like that's going on, but it's not, and it's a bit confusing. They're saying it's just like that. It's like they're waking up from this dream and they're kind of confused. Like, they think it's still happening, but then they see that it's not, and until it's completely disconnected, it'll still be a little confused and a little impaired. Question 378. How is it possible for the impairment of the brain to react upon the spirit after death? So they're saying, so how is this possible? How can the defect in the physical body be able to affect the spirit after the body is gone? And the spirit said, it is a remembrance. A weight bears down upon the spirit, and since it was not aware of everything that took place during its insanity, it requires some time to be able to understand its current state. That is why, the longer insanity lasts during life, the longer the affliction and the constraint will last after death. Disconnected from the body, the spirit continues to feel the impressions of its bonds for some time thereafter. So it's not that the spirit is still being physically restrained, but it's the remembrance, it's thinking. It's after knowing that you can't, okay, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this. Now finally you can do it. It's kind of weird. You kind of still remember that you can't, so it's hard for you to just go ahead and do it. So it's this remembrance of all these, like, rules and restrictions. Now it's free, but now you still feel like you have these restrictions on you. And a way that we can relate this to ourselves is that we have all these rules. We're growing up with all these rules and rules and rules and rules. And then eventually we're going to go off and live on our own, and technically there aren't going to be all these rules. You can eat ice cream every day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You cannot shower, you cannot make your bed, but after having all these rules, you kind of feel like you still have to. There's not these rules set in place, but you have the remembrance of that. So that's the way that kind of we can understand it better in our point of view. And then now we're on to the next part in this chapter, and this part is titled Childhood. Question 379. Is the spirit who animates the body of a child as developed as the spirit of an adult? So, basically they're saying, so the spirit, when it's in a child, is it as developed as the spirit of an adult? And the spirit said, maybe more so if it is more evolved. Only its imperfect organs keep it from fully manifesting itself. It must act according to the instruments that it serves in. So what they're saying is sometimes even the spirit of the child is more evolved than the spirit of the adult. But the thing is that it can't fully express all of its thoughts, all of its power, because it can only do as much as the body it's given. So if it's a baby, the baby can't do what a 10-year-old can or what an adult can. So you can only see how much based on the body that it has, but the spirit could be even more evolved than that of an adult. Question 380. In a very young child, and despite the obstacles that the imperfection of its organs impose on its ability to freely manifest itself, does the spirit think as a child or as an adult? So when the spirit is in a very young child, do they think like a child or like an adult? And the spirits answered, while a child, it is natural that the as yet undeveloped organ of intelligence cannot provide it with all the intuition of an adult. Its intelligence is therefore quite limited until age matures its reason. The confusion accompanied incarnation does not cease suddenly after birth, but only dissipates gradually with the development of the organs. So what they're saying here is that when the spirit is while a child, the spirit can only do as much as the body of the child can. So if the brain is not developed to understand all these complicated thoughts, then even if the spirit knows them, it won't be able to convey them because the child can't comprehend these thoughts yet. So while a child, you kind of do still think like a child because that's all you're being able to express. Like we were saying with the development of the brain. The brain isn't as developed as it will be, so it doesn't have all this room to think about complicated concepts. And it's still in this confusion of returning from the spirit world. Then Allan Kardec put his own comment in and he says, an observation supports this reason. The dreams of a child do not have the character of the dreams of an adult. Their object is almost always childish, which is an indication of the nature of the spirit's preoccupations. So they're saying that one kind of example of how we can see this is in child and adult dreams. So children, they always have these dreams that are fantasy or more, you can see more childish. And adults, they have more realistic dreams, and their characters of the dreams are much different. So you can see that the childish dreams can go with how the spirit is thinking. So that's where we'll leave off today, but before we leave off today, I'd like to read a message from the Daily Book of Positive Quotations by Linda Picone for today's date, August 15th. Faith. What we need is not the will to believe, but the wish to find out. Faith involves a leap of imagination. Real faith also involves a searching, a desire to find answers to life's most difficult questions. We may have faith that follows the teachings of an organized religion, or we may have faith we have acquired through our own experiences and studies. In either case, we do not betray our faith when we continue to search for meaning. Rather, we deepen and strengthen it. My faith sustains me and leads me on a continuous search for more knowledge. I'm Bia, and this is Kardec Radio for Teens. Thank you all for listening. This has been Kardec Radio for Teens. Thank you all for listening.